topic is a fact table, and today we'll go and see about how many types of dimensions are there and how many types of facts are available in a table and how do we define them and what are the different types of schemas that we are going to discuss. So the dimensions generally classified as slowly changing dimension types. So we call all the dimensions as slowly changing dimensions. Slowly changing dimensions. So why we call the dimensions as a slowly changing dimensions, that we see now. So think about, let's say we have a customer dimension, and customer will have an attributes like name, city, supplier, phone number, I mean whatever, city name, phone number, and all those things. You'll have all those details. If you think about the attributes of the customer changes very slowly over a period of time. Suppose, let's say you are actually opening a bank account with a bank with your customer details about your address and the phone number and the email address and everything. So maybe for a long period of time, maybe after 1 year or 2 year or 3 year, you may be changing your phone number or you may be changing your address or something. So the attributes of the dimensions doesn't changes very frequently on a day-to-day basis. It happens over a long period of time. Since the attributes of the dimension changes very slowly, that's why the dimensions are classified as slowly changing dimensions. And slowly changing dimensions are actually of 5 types. One is a type 1, other is a type 2, next one is a type 3, slowly changing dimension type 1. So we also have the other types, hybrid type called as a type 4 and type 6. So we have type 4 and type 6, which will be type 4 and type 6. These are the hybrid slowly changing dimension. The implementation or the data loading process through the Informatica, it is a little complex. So we don't design any dimensions. As a type 4 and type 6. So the most of the time we design the dimensions in the fact table, in the warehouse as type 1, type 2 or type 3. Slowly changing dimensions. So the possibility of a customer dimension, whenever a woman gets married, her last name gets changed, marriage status gets changed, and the address, household income, and everything gets changed. These are all the possibility of the attributes which gets changed whenever a woman gets married. So which means there is a changes which is happening to your dimension, which is so called as a slowly changing dimension. It happens over a period of time. So this is all called as a slowly changing dimension. So here we are going to understand. So that means whenever you are designing a table, whenever you are designing a dimension table, you choose either it as a type 1, type 2 or type 3 based upon your requirements. Now we are going to understand which dimension table stores the historical data, which dimension table doesn't store the historical data, and what kind of dimensions we have to consider in a way designing it. So the first thing is about the type 1 dimension. Type 1 dimension doesn't store the historical data. It will always stores the most recent data, and no historical data will be present in the type 1 dimension. No historical data will be present in the type 1 dimension. So the type 1 dimension is just like a OLTP system which doesn't store the historical data. As and when the attribute of the customer or some other customer changes, it will also update the attributes in the OLAP system. It will always stores the updates the existing record with the modification and doesn't maintain the historical data. So let's try and understand with an example one by one. So type 2 will store the historical data. It maintains a history. It adds a new record whenever there is a change in the attributes. whenever there is a change in the attributes. So it maintains a both old and new record. So that is the history. Maintains both old and new record. Maintains both old and new record in SCD type 2. In SCD type 2, it will maintain both old and new record. Type 3, which stores the partial historical data, which stores the partial historical data, and we are going to use type 3 in a very rare scenarios. It will maintain where it resides type 2. It is in the OLAP. We are talking about the OLAP and we are talking about the dimensions. We are talking about the dimensions, how to design the dimensions in the OLAP. Right? So we are going to see that, how we are going to do it, how to design that and how to maintain it. Now let's take a simple example called as a supplier information. So supplier information, assume that this is a supplier table which you have it in the OLTP table, and you have the attributes like supplier code, and you have the attributes like supplier name, and you have the other thing called as a supplier state. So where the supplier is actually supplying it from. Assume that we have different suppliers. So first one is a wall, and you have a Walmart, and assume that they are supplying it from Envoy, and you have TGT, and the other one is your Target, and this is supplied from IR. So assume that now you are extracting the data from supplier table and then loading the data into dim supplier 1. Dim supplier 1 is a SCD type 1. Assume that you have designed the dim supplier 1 as a SCD type 1, and let's also understand how many types of, what kind of columns we need in the. So whenever you are storing, it doesn't store any historical data. So we are just going to use all the columns, whatever is available. And along with this, we'll also have a columns like create date and the last updated date. Create date and the last updated date will be there to use it. Walmart, New York, Target, Illinois. So this is a one. You started extracting the data. What does an SCD type 1 says is that this is important. Whenever a record is new to the OLAP system, that means this record is not available in the OLAP system, then insert a record in the target table. Whenever a record is existing, suppose the record is already existing in the target table, and there is a change in the attributes. That means you have a modification done on the supplier state or the supplier name. So then you update the record with the modifications. Update the record with the modifications that we are going to see it. So whenever a record is new to the OLAP system, insert a record. Whenever a record is existing, there is a change in the attribute, then you're going to update the record with the modifications. That you're going to do it. So first time, in order to verify whether the record is existing or not in the target table, we need to actually do it based upon the unique identifier. So how can we identify the supplier in a unique way? By using a supplier code. Supplier code is a unique way to determine the customer. So first we are going to determine whether this is existing in the target table or not. So if you see, the Walmart is not available. That means it is new to the OLAP system. It is new to the target. So we are going to insert that record. So this becomes supplier code is Wal, and this you have a Walmart, and the supplier state is a New York, and the created date, let's say whatever the date that you're creating, you'll stamp it as a sys date. Sys date is nothing but the current date and time. So again, it is a similar story with the target as well. So target is not available in this, so you have this. And similarly, you're going to update the created date and the last updated date with the sys date. System date, you're going to update it. And later on, if you see, this Walmart, let's say the Walmart supplier has actually relocated from the New York to, so again to Texas. So TX. So this is being, this supplier is being relocated. This supplier is being relocated. So what we are going to do it. So whenever there is a change in the attribute, now if you see when you start extracting the data from supplier, and then first you're going to check, yes, Walmart supplier is already existing, and whenever a record is existing and there is a change in the attributes, there is a change in the attributes, which means, do you have a change in the supplier name? No. Do you have a change in the supplier state? Yes. There is a change in the supplier state, so which is, it has actually moved from New York to Texas, so you need to update the record even in the target table. Even in the target table, this supplier state will become TX, and again you're going to update the last updated date with a sysdate. This may happen maybe after 1 year or 2 years. This may happen maybe after 1 year or 2 years. This becomes, this last updated date will get updated. So what you are doing, you're updating the attribute which is being modified along with the last updated date. Now the question is that in SCD type 1, if I want to know where this Walmart supplier was before Texas, then I cannot identify because I don't have the historical data in SCD type 1. So wherever you don't need a historical information for your business, let's say I'm designing a type 1, I'm designing a dimension table, and I don't need the historical data. The historical data is not necessary for my business. In those cases, we'll go for a SCD type 1 dimension. So the example is that whenever you are creating a region dimension, so let's say the region dimension, today you're creating with a region. So let's say you have a region dimension where you have a country, state, and all those things, counties and everything is being stored. It's very rare that your names of the counties or your names of the country gets changed or something like that. So in that case, you don't need a historical data. You don't need a historical data for it. So where you can store the normal way of doing it. So wherever the historical data is not necessary, we can always design those dimensions. We can always design those dimensions as a SCD type 1 dimensions. SCD type 1 dimensions. That is your dim supplier 1. So whenever you want to design such kind of a dimension, you need to do this. So you'll always need to have a primary key, which is a unique way to identify it. Because the supplier code is unique, here I'll consider the supplier code as unique. And if the supplier code here, in this case, it is indeed it is a varchar field. Generally, we don't consider fields with a varchar as a primary key. In case we have a field something like this, we'll always go for a number generated primary key. Because it is easier for us to join whenever we want to query the data. So that is how whenever you are designing a SCD type 1, what you have to remember is that, so the audit columns and along with the attributes what you are tracking. If it is a varchar field, add an extra key for So in this case, if you want to design, so we'll design one thing called as a supplier PK, and you have a supplier name, and supplier state. This is also one of the column, supplier state. And you'll have a created date and last updated date. So you'll have a create date, last updated date. So create date and last updated date will be there for every table in your warehouse, because to track, I want to track when the record is being created and when the record is being updated. So this is how you have to create it. Here, if you see, I have added an extra primary key, extra column, that is a supplier primary key, which will be the sequence generated number. We have seen what is the sequence. It will be the sequence generated number to store the unique way of determination. So this PK here, whatever you are generating, which is nothing to do with the business. Your business doesn't know what it is about. This doesn't significantly used in your business purposes. It is just there to your performance orientation purpose, and this is just there to increase your performance. So this PK, whatever you have added, supplier PK, this is called as a surrogate primary key. We call it as in the warehouse, it is called as a surrogate primary key. So surrogate primary key is something that which you call it which in the warehouse it is called as a number generated key, which is nothing to do with the business. Surrogate primary key, which is nothing to do with the business. It is just a number generated key. It's a dummy key. It's a dummy key. So that's how you design the SCD type 1. That's how you design the SCD type 1. Now, let's take the similar example and then try and understand about the SCD type 2, how the SCD type 2 will be designed. So I'm just representing this as a New York and Texas, and just that it has migrated. But when you go and see in your OATP system, you'll have only one value, only Texas as your value, but it doesn't store the historical data as we understand. So that's how the SCD type 1 will be. I mean, we are going to see, this is just an example how we are going to design the SCD type 1 and all those, and how we are going to load the data, that we are going to see it while implementing it from the Informatica. When we are implementing it from the Informatica, we'll be coming to know how to load the SCD type 2 or type 1 dimension from this. So this is how the type 1 dimension will be implemented. Whenever there is a change in the attributes and the record is existing, you're going to update it, else you're going to insert a record in the target table. Yes, SCD stands for a slowly changing dimensions. So this was the first one which we written here. So slowly changing dimension. SCD stands for a slowly changing dimensions. Why we call it as a slowly changing also, we discussed. So now to understand about the type 2 stores the historical data. Type 2 stores the historical data. So let's take the same example and then try and implement for type 2. What does the type 2 says? Whenever a record is new to the OLAP system, whenever a record is new to OLAP, whenever a record is new to OLAP system, you are going to insert a record, insert a record. Whenever a record is existing, whenever a record is existing and there is a change in the attributes, then also you are going to insert a new record. It's not like SCD type 1, you are going to again insert a new record in this. So that time also you are going to insert a new record again, So, and also whenever the record is existing, you'll insert a record, at the same time you update the old record, whatever is available. So what attributes you're going to update, that we will see. This is what happens whenever a SCD type 2. If the record is new to the OLAP system, you'll insert a record. Whenever a record is existing and there is a change in the attributes, you're going to insert a new record and you're going to update the existing record. That is your old record. Existing record. Now we'll try and implement how an SCD type 1. So we have seen, we have two suppliers. One of the supplier has actually relocated from New York to Texas. So assume that you are actually loading for a DIM supplier 2. So how to design the DIM supplier 2? This is very important. So please concentrate here. So now you have the supplier code. So since you have the supplier code, so if you actually mark the supplier code as a primary key, assume that supplier code is a primary key, and then you have the supplier name and then the supplier state. And as usual, you'll have a created date and the last updated date to determine when the record is being updated and when the record is being inserted. This audit columns will be there, last updated date. So assume that you started extracting the data from this. So the first time you have the Walmart. So the supplier name is Walmart. And you have the supplier state, first time it was New York. So I'm just actually giving you the various scenarios. If you design it as a SCD type 1, how you are going to store the data. If you are designing it as SCD type 2, how you are going to store the data. And you have a created date, that is your sys date, and the last updated date, that is a sys date. So Walmart, and you have a target. So So the supplier name is target, and it was Eleanor's, and you are going to update the sys date and this as is, sys date as is. So assume that now the Walmart supplier is actually relocated from New York to the Texas over a time period of time. So what does an SCD type 2 says? Whenever a record is existing and there is a change in the attributes, you're going to insert a new record. So if you try and insert a new record here, so wall, and then you'll have a supplier name as a Walmart, and this time it is TX, and you're going to have again sysdate and the last, this sysdate, and you're going to update it as is. So what happens now if you're designing the supplier code as a primary key? Does it allow this value? If you're defining the supplier code as a primary key, this value you cannot insert it because you're trying to insert with the same supplier code. It doesn't allow you to insert the value. So since the supplier code doesn't allow to store the multiple values, that's why whenever we are designing a dimension, SCD to type 2 dimension, we'll always have a primary key called as a surrogate primary key, which will help you to store the historical data. The supplier primary key is a surrogate key which we just discussed. It is nothing to do with the business. Your business people doesn't have to do this information. So what we are going to do, whenever you are inserting a data, you are going to insert a data something like this. So first time I have a surrogate primary key. Now I am going to show you how the data will be stored in the dimension table. So this is how it stores. One Walmart and this. The second record, how it stores when you are going it, again this record will be incremented. So this becomes 2, supplier PK, this becomes 2, and you are going to store the value something like this. When you are storing the historical record again, this becomes 3, but still the Walmart supplier code is same, but still it allows because my primary key is this one this time, and whatever the value that you have. So you are going to store the data now. Walmart, Texas, and whenever there is a change in the attributes, let's say this time again there is a change in the supplier name. So assume that there is a change in the supplier name. So from the target in the source level, they have updated the source supplier name. Instead of target, they updated from target corporation or target retail card, something like this. So since there is a change in the attribute of the supplier name, again you are going to insert one more record for a target. So this will become 4. Whenever there is a change in attribute, if you have 100 attributes, if there is a change in any one of the attribute, you are going to track the history. So now this will become target retail, and this becomes whatever the state, and this will become the sysdate at the last updated date. So we are taking a simple example. And then doing it. So likewise, you are going to maintain the historical data. Whenever there is a change, we are going to insert a new record. So now I can easily determine what are the two values present for a Walmart. Now a question is that how are you going to determine the latest record? How are you going to determine the old record? So how can I determine the old record? And how can I determine the latest record for a particular supplier? Suppose let's say I want to identify Walmart is actually supplying the goods from which state now. How can I determine from the table? I have 2 records for a Walmart, whether it is doing it from the New York or doing it from the Texas. So when you want to identify such kind of a scenarios, it is becoming difficult for us to determine which one is the latest record here. We can't actually depend upon the surrogate primary key because this is just a number generated key. You might not have a same number of values. Same number of sequence values where you're going to do it. Maybe this doesn't show up using this. So to determine that's why the SCD type 2 will be implemented in 3 ways. One is by using a flag, another is by using the version, another is by using the dates. So you're going to use a flag, version, and then the dates. So you're going to use that to determine the values. Flag, version, and then the dates. So what you're going to do is that it's just a very simple approach. So now whenever I'm designing by using the flag, So supplier PK, and I'm going to keep one flag as current flag. I'm going to keep one flag as current flag, and along with this you'll also have the created date and the last updated date. So whenever you are making an entry into this, so first time you're inserting a record. So let's take only one example and then understand. So this current flag will be Y. So now I can easily write a query saying select star from dim supplier 2 where the current flag is equal to Y. That gives me the latest record. Whenever I'm making a new record, let's say I'm making a new entry. This time, this is for a target. This is the first time you're inserting a record into the target. So this also will be Y. So this flag also will be Y. So for a target and the Walmart. Now when you're making one more entry for a Walmart, so this is the change record. Change record. So when you're going to make one more entry, this time which one will become a current flag? This will become the flag as Y, and the old record will be updated. Old record will be updated to no. So at any point of time, you'll have only one record with the current flag is equal to Y. So if you go back and then see here, see what we have written. Whenever a record is existing, there is a change in the attribute, insert a new record and update existing record. So you're updating the existing record current flag to N. You're updating the current. So similarly, you're going to update. So whenever you want to write a query here, so I can always write a simple query where I can write select star from dim supplier 2. Let's say dim supplier 2 is a SCD type 2 where supplier code, where the supplier code is equal to Walmart and current flag is equal to Y, and current flag is equal to Y. So this is going to be your supplier. This is going to be your dim supplier 2 which is used. This is how you are going to determine. This is a one way of implementing the SCD type 2. You can also implement this in the other way. So just a similar approach, but we are just going to use the version. That's it. So this version will whenever we insert a new record, it will be incrementing. So you are going to increment it based upon the supplier. So now for New York, this will become 1.0. Since the target is actually first time you are inserting, so this also will be the 1.0. This also will be 1.0. This also will become 1.0. Next time when you are making one more entry for a same Walmart supplier, so what does this become? So your versioning will become 2. This version will become 2.0. So how can you determine the latest record? Based upon the maximum version. So how are you going to do that? So it will be of the similar approach. So how are you going to write a query? So you're going to write a query using this and version is equal to maximum version. So how are you going to select the maximum version again? So you have to write a subquery here to fetch the maximum version. Select maximum version from dim supplier to where supplier code is equal to this. Again, you have to write entire story to get that. Entire this one to write a query. So this is just that you're what you're doing. You're just fetching the maximum record. There is a small disadvantage with maintaining of the flag and version. So what is the disadvantage is that suppose if you have to determine during what period of time does a Walmart supplier was in the New York state, you can't determine. At what period? Let's say June, July. I want to actually find out during what period of time a particular supplier was in the New York state. So we cannot determine by using the version and the current flag. That is a small disadvantage with the current flag and all these things. That's why most of your SCD type 2 dimensions are implemented with dates. So the dates means it is going to be implemented with effective start date and effective end date. Effective start date, effective end date, effective end date. So when you are designing the dimension, instead of having the column like current flag and all these things, so you're going to have effective start date and effective end date. Effective start date and effective end date as a 2 date columns to determine for what period of time this was available. So whenever you are making an entry here, whenever you are making an entry, so first time, let's say during the Jan 2013, the supplier is actually added to your business, So your effective start date will become 1st Jan 2013. Let's say that day you are inserting the record. An effective end date, you don't know how long the supplier is going to stay in the New York or stay with this name. You don't know. That's why instead of keeping it as null, we'll always stamp it as a future maximum date. So that is your 31st December 2999. So this is a very big date, very maximum date value you are going to keep it to mark how long the supplier is going to be. And similarly, whenever you make one more entry for a target this time, so when you make an entry, something like this. So whenever you are making a new record, so let's say this target supplier is being added to your business maybe on 28th February 2013. So you are going to make, and you don't know how long this record is going to valid. So that's why you're going to make it as 31st December 299. So when you are making a new entry for a Walmart again with a new attribute, what will happen? Let's say the supplier Walmart has actually relocated from New York to Texas on 2nd Jan 2014. 2nd Jan 2014. So you're going to make 2nd Jan 2014, and this record, what will happen? This will become the 31st December 2999. But this record is valid only till 1st Jan 2014 because the supplier was in New York until 1st Jan 2014, and they started supplying the goods from Texas from 2nd Jan 2014. That means this record got updated, and at the same time this record got inserted. So that is how you are going to insert the data and update the data. So how are you going to determine the current record now? So how do you determine which one is a current record out of this? In the other case, you return it as a current flag is equal to Y. So this one you are going to identify in such a way, select star from dim supplier 2. So you'll always compare with the system date. Sys date is between effective start date and effective end date. Effective start date and effective end date. So this way you're going to use to determine this values. So effective start date and effective end date, this is a way that you are going to design SED type 2. So far any questions? We actually have a power shutdown today, and my battery is actually running out. So if you have any questions, we'll discuss quickly. I'm not sure when it will get disconnected. I don't have a backup because backup is also not running in the apartment. So any questions, please so far? Hello? Okay. So what we do is, remaining things will continue it too. Yeah, Pramit, go ahead with your question.
So your effective start date and effective end date, this query will fetch exactly. Could you once again explain what this query will?
It will fetch this record, right? So what is today's record? Today's date is January 10th, right? So when you go and compare, January 10th is between 2004, falls between these two. It doesn't fall between these two. So this record will not be retrieved. When you go and try it here, this January 10th falls between these two records. So this record will be retrieved. I want to identify my current record, right? Yeah.
Right.
So this will fetch only this value. It doesn't fetch this value.
Okay.
So that's how we are going to implement SED type 2. Right? Answered your question?
Right.
So do we come tomorrow?
Yeah. We are planning to actually meet tomorrow because we are behind the schedule, and we'll do it tomorrow's class. I think you guys are available tomorrow, right? Any?
I am not. So if I am not available, can somebody forward the recording of this whole thing? Or tomorrow, are you going to do any live sessions with Informatica, or it is still going to be more of a theory?
It's going to be the theory, and yeah, same time.
Yeah, so we'll try to attend, but in case if we are not able to attend,
Yeah, I will
as it
forward
is
the
just a
recording.
theory, then we tomorrow what we are going to cover tomorrow? What are the topics?
There's a star schema, snowflake schema. It's just hardly half an hour, and then later on we'll talk about the architecture of Informatica, how the Informatica works.
Okay.
Yeah, we can
But I
share
will
that.
definitely get the recording of tomorrow, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the trouble, and we don't have actually backup. So because of some reason, it has actually gone. And okay, then thank you. So I don't know when it will get stopped. Thank you. Thanks a lot.